For the last decade, Hannah Kokkinos has reigned Australian cinema as the queen of the art house underground. Although her breakthrough film Head On, with its confrontational mix of ethnicity and sexuality, managed to make sizable impressions even on the mainstream Richter scale. Her second feature, The Book of Revelations, was less accessible, but no less inspiring, solidifying her position as a filmmaker not afraid to push audiences into the darker and more desperate regions of the human psyche and to see a beauty within it. This week sees the release of her latest project, Blessed, and it's fairly safe to say her fans aren't about to be disappointed. Its interwoven narratives of mothers and their teenage children explore a variety of themes, from cultural displacement to parental adaptation. It's beautifully shot, exquisitely scored, cleverly penned, and, of course, directed with all the heart and guts you'd expect from this quintessential contemporary Aussie filmmaker. I caught up with Anna to not only talk about this latest film, but to see if she had any advice for up-and-coming Australian creatives.
Blessed is based on a play called Who's Afraid of the Working Class, and I saw it about 9 years ago. What was interesting about the play was that it dealt with a whole set of characters who in some ways were ordinary people dealing with kind of everyday life. But the way they dealt with their issues or their struggles was very much with great courage, dignity, kind of intelligence and humour. And that's what really struck me, that they were all characters who were kind of feisty, tough, had bravado, but also very vulnerable. So the characters themselves had an intrinsic quality that kind of interested me. And as we developed the screenplay, one of the big things that struck us at a certain point was because we had all these amazing characters, but nothing was binding them together, And at some point, I went back to the writers, and we took a bit of a step back, and I thought about it more deeply, and thought, well, what was the emotional connection I had to that original play? What was the thing that really drew me in? And the thing that got me was the Rhonda Orton-Stacy story. The idea that this mother talks about her children as blessings. The idea that every child is a mother's blessing. And so once we thought about that more deeply, it was like that became the overriding theme. And so we kind of thought, my God, we're actually telling a story about mothers and children. And so we reconstructed the whole play around that central idea, the core idea that no matter what shit's going down, the kind of the primal, powerful connection between mothers and children is kind of undeniable, sort of unbreakable. So I guess in some ways the film is a kind of a really beautiful emotional exploration of that core idea, told through a number of different characters.
Because in some ways it almost breaks down that social element, doesn't it? Because a lot of the mothers in it, they're almost, it's lost just the kids.
Yes,
in some
exactly.
ways, aren't they?
Yeah.
Sort of the line sort of blurs a little bit.
That's right.
There,
yeah,
rather than just have that sort of very sort of, this is the authority figure and this is the child sort of thing.
Absolutely. And one of the fascinating things as we expanded the mothers in the screenplay and in the film is we realised it was becoming a really fascinating exploration of motherhood as well. And you're right, in some ways the mothers, what we discover through the course of the film is that the mothers are just as vulnerable as the kids that they care for. And that was a really powerful idea, because I think there's a kind of a truth to that. So that to me is kind of really universal. So even though the film largely centres on, working class, lower middle class families and underclass, there's a universality about the conflict between teenage kids and their mums or parents that I think we can all sort of identify with.
That's interesting that you should say that in a way, because one of the things that excites me about your work really is that we've been hearing a lot of the government and even Garrett and we've had heads of screen in Australia very, very negative about the Australian film industry, I find, in a way that we should be making more mainstream films. We're getting this message that we should all be writing things that are broader. And the obvious sort of association is we should be making sort of fluffy, light rubbish. And so in one way, here comes a film that's quite dark and quite sombre in some ways, although it has its redemptive qualities, of course. Yet it's got that, within that, it still has that sort of universality. Is that, do you think, the way young writers should approach? Because I speak to a lot of young people and they're like, we don't write crap, what do we do?
No. Well, you see, I think, I'll just talk about my own experience a bit. I've written and made films about things that are really important to me. that I actually believe in, that I've experienced on some level. And I mean, you know, my work is not autobiographical, but you've got to write from your own place. You've got to write from your own sensibility. And I think it's really important that we make films or we tell stories that feel significant to us, that have resonances for us, that are kind of about us. And so I would be saying to all kind of budding filmmakers out there or budding writers, you got to follow your heart. You got to do the thing that you're passionate about. If you want to write comedy, well, do it well. If you want to make films like me which deal with our humanity and the complexities of humanity, go for it. If you want to kind of do musicals, go for it with a passion. There's absolutely no reason why you should feel kind of shackled by any preconceived ideas about what you should be doing. I remember when people read head on the script, people laughed at me, you know, when they read that script, and they said, "Oh my God, you know, what are you doing? This is just like so weird, so out there." Well, you know, we made the film, and it's now 10 years on, a kind of a cult classic. Huge box office at the time, sold all around the world. Now, everyone would have probably told me, "Oh, don't do it because, you know, there's no place for it." Well, I think there's a place for a lot of things if it's done well. You know, if your desire is to connect with an audience and communicate really beautiful things to an audience, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be doing it. I started because I felt compelled to tell stories. And stories that I felt at the time I wasn't seeing on screen. You know, coming out of my own kind of place and my own sensibility and my own unique set of experiences. And so I think that you have to kind of put yourself out there, you have to be bold, but you also have to have a desire to communicate to audiences. So with a film like Blessed, see, the interesting thing is that I don't see it as a dark film. I see it as a profoundly resonant film. I see it as a film that is really speaking to us on a very contemporary level. I see it as a film that has great beauty in it, that has great joy in it, but that also has great truth in it. And my guiding light in some way is being truthful and actually being really honest.
One of the things that really strikes me about the film is the look of the film. So it's shot in handheld, but it's bizarre. A lot of the handheld films we see then visually try to have a very sparse sort of feel to them. This is a very beautiful. I mean, it's very cinematographic in some ways, even though it's got that handheld feel to it. Is that an important balance for you?
I mean, it's interesting because I shot head-on handheld and I shot this one handheld. And the reason I do it is because it gives, for Blessed, it gives us a certain kind of intimacy with the actors, which is really important. But at the same time, in the frame, we really worked hard at giving each frame a certain kind of richness, a certain kind of beauty. The colours of the film are very thought through. We kind of worked with the colours of the flame, the blues, the oranges, the golden moments in the film, the way in which we kind of lovingly caress the characters with the camera. And then we go from those very intimate spaces to beautiful shots of the landscape. In other words, the world that these kind of characters inhabit. I wanted the film to have a certain kind of visual beauty, so that an audience could feel on some level that despite the complex range of human emotions that we kind of travel with all of these characters, the filmmaker, me, and all my collaborators are coming to those characters from a place of love and compassion and sympathy and understanding.
Yeah, it has for me, I really enjoy that duplicity because it has that sort of sensuality and all those other levels that we generally have, but then it still has that sort of rawness. It's still very much as driven, you know, it's still very character driven, and I mean the performances are just incredible. So it still feels very raw without missing it. Other bit that so many handheld dogma style films I find
don't. They sort of almost make the fun. They almost kind of grubby it up in a way that I don't find. Oh, well, you know, I mean, that's not what I wanted to do. You know, that's not a choice I want to make. That I kind of think on an aesthetic level, there's something really beautiful about photographing faces and landscape in a way that has a raw beauty, that has a truth, that really kind of brings out the sensuality of each character as well.